Nothing corruption will not penetrate in Nigeria, including your states. If you are from any state in Nigeria, your state is about to go down. Corruption, whenever anybody is overemphasizing about the high level of corruption in Nigeria, what normally comes to your mind is taking bribe now. Taking bribe is far beyond that. What led to security forces abuses? It is corruption. These are the security forces that are supposed to protect your lives and your properties. But here we are, they abuse you. Now they're about to carry out corrupt approval to divide and cut the state, even when we all notice that due to the 1914 amalgamation of the Northern and the Southern protectorates that were into Nigeria was done without the consent of the vice ethnic groups. That now led to the lack of national cohesion, no mutual trust any longer. There is now mistrust and a sense of us. We. Not then, no, not they go down. One Nigeria from the mouth, but deep inside most of this leader, now their own they are talking about. They have to talk about their own, which is the sense of division. This division often fuel patronage networks and tribalism, where loyalty to ethnic groups or religion group. Of course, you heard me right, religious groups. And their interest is what supersedes national interest due to corruption as a tool. And now it has gotten to a stage whereby they start cutting each state in order for them to fraudulently create a new state. Imagine what led the nation to a situation like this. It's nothing but corruption and bad governance. Yes, bad governance is what led the nation to this problem. Where there is good governance, competent governance who has the interest of their people at heart, there's nothing that will deprive that governance not to have access to his people, to the people he claimed that is being appointed into the office to work for, to serve. Like this journalist you're about to listen to. Look at her excuses. Isn't it obvious that all the media houses, majority have been bought over due to this same corruption? See a good governor, for example, like Burkina Faso president, and the size of the Burkina Faso is equivalent to the size of Edo State. For example, Burkina Faso approximately 272,967 square kilometers, while Edo State in Nigeria is approximately 19,559 square kilometers. So we're not talking about population. Burkina Faso has an estimate of population of around 21 million population, while Edo State, Nigeria, estimates population of about 4.3 million. Many have run away due to bad governance. Million population. So when you now compare their age and the level of their knowledge, there you will understand me better. Just regardez là-bas.
A young soldier rises from Burkina Faso with a bold promise. to restore African dignity and defy foreign control. Is Ibrahim Traoré the answer that Africa has been waiting for? Let's find out.
Moi, je pleure le peuple français. Mais quand même, il est bien pour l'Afrique. Il est un mal nécessaire pour nous. Ceux qui veulent se réveiller, se réveillent. Ceux qui ne veulent pas se réveiller, comme on le dit, on ne peut pas réveiller quelqu'un qui ne dort pas. Les Africains doivent se réveiller. Nous devons travailler à être indépendants, à faire au moins que nos peuples connaissent le bonheur. Et la lutte contre l'impérialisme, c'est ça. Il faut décoloniser les mentalités, prendre en compte toutes ces données-là, parce que le monde nous donne tellement d'exemples à voir. Pour eux, il n'y a pas de morale. Ils peuvent vous désigner aujourd'hui terroriste, mais demain, vous êtes un héros, par leur simple bouche. Ils décident de ce qu'ils font. Ils parlent de démocratie, mais ils se font eux-mêmes des coups d'État.
Those were the words of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the new transitional leader of Burkina Faso. And in today's episode, we're going to explore whether he truly represents a new revolutionary future for Africa, or whether this is more hype than substance. And in today's episode, I want to explore three areas. The first is I want to look at the bold new reforms that Ibrahim Traoré has instituted, which have got Africans talking about how he could be the real deal. Then, second, I want to delve into his story. Who is he and how did he rise to power? And what is the context of Traoré's reforms and moves? And then finally, this episode will help you to also look at some of the criticisms that have been leveled against him and why he still has to answer a few questions as he moves towards a new future for Burkina Faso. So, let's get into part one. Best place to start is, let's look at some of the widespread and sweeping reforms that Captain Traoré has instituted, which have really lifted people's hopes in Africa and have signaled a new future for a young African leader. Remember, Captain Traoré is only in his mid-30s, but already he's taken some bold moves that have surprised and encouraged many Africans across the continent. So, the first is geopolitically. Expelling France from Burkina Faso was no mean feat, and after the wave of coups that swept across the Sahel region in Africa, one of Captain Traoré's first moves was to make sure that the French military was removed from Burkina Faso. He cancelled a number of military agreements, and because France had been so central to West Africa for at least a century leading up to that moment, this marked a key shift in power relations in the region, where Captain Traoré and a number of other states, after the coups that swept across the Sahel in 2020 and afterwards, really began to reject French presence in West Africa. Now, in addition to that, and moving away from France, Captain Traoré also spearheaded a move away from the incumbent regional institution that had been governing West Africa, and that was ECOWAS. Now, his critique was that ECOWAS had become a neo-imperial body and was too close to the imperial powers and wasn't truly doing the security work that it needed to do to repel and expel many of the foreign Islamist militants who had really been causing havoc in the West African region. So instead of siding with ECOWAS, who were taking time to recognize these new governments, a new regional body was formed, and this was the Alliance of Sahel States. And this is three key states who are trying to chart a new future: Burkina Faso itself, Mali, and then we also have Niger. So there was a double shift, a shift away from the European colonial power and former colonizing power in France, and then a new shift to create a new regional bloc within Africa to challenge the old incumbent bloc that really was sluggish and wasn't setting its sights on the African people's aspirations as it should have. And this was an important signal to many Africans because it did two things at once. It showed how Africa needed to rid itself of the former colonial powers and chart a course of geopolitical independence, but it also showed how new African leaders needed to detach themselves from some of the aging African institutions that themselves have really failed to liberate Africa in the way that they proposed that they would. And this causes us to ask questions about regions like SADC, regions like the East Africa Community, ECOWAS itself, even the AU, and to see whether new, more fresh bodies need to rise to challenge these bodies because of how slow they're actually moving in creating the goal of African independence. Now, in addition to this, another thing that Captain Traoré did, which was quite interesting on the geopolitical front, was following the invasion of Libya and because of the wave of Islamic terror that had spread across the African continent, both in the Horn of Africa and in the Sahel region, there was a serious problem of insecurity in Burkina Faso, as in many similar states in the region. And Islamic militants had really taken over the north of the country and really destabilized a lot of the country. So what Traoré did was, instead of resting on foreign powers to try to expel and restore stability and security, he called on the nation itself, and he created a kind of volunteer corps, which was then linked to and integrated with the army, and managed to raise, by some accounts, tens of thousands of people who were then able to, from below, create stability and security in the country. Now, to the extent to which he has been able to actually restore stability is still up for debate, but this more citizen-inspired security model replaced a colonial-inspired security model, and this is what happened when France was removed largely from Burkina Faso. However, and we'll get into this in the third part where we talk about some criticisms, he's also come closer to Russia. But although people would argue that Russia, even though it's not a former colonial power in Africa, may still have imperial ambitions, we also can't remove the agency of African states. And it's often ascribed to African states that just because they partner with certain countries, that they must be under their wing or pursuing some kind of subterranean agenda. But I'm not so sure that Captain Traoré's move towards Russia represents Russian imperialism in Africa. Rather, it seems to be an attempt to gain flexibility and to choose which of the great powers to ally with, which will still retain the most flexibility for Burkina Faso itself. But we'll get into that more when we talk about the criticisms, because Russian influence in Africa is something that we do need to think about as Africans charting a course for independence, even if Russia is different to former colonial powers, and China as well. Now, let's talk about some of the economic reforms as we're still on part one, because this is quite something. Burkina Faso has a number of minerals, foremost of which is gold, and the question of how the mineral wealth of Burkina Faso would be appropriately shared has been a key question dating back to the time of Thomas Sankara and the independence of Burkina Faso. Now, what Traoré has done is quite sweeping, because he's taken control in many ways of Burkina Faso's resources, especially when it comes to questions of agriculture and minerals. Firstly, the government has identified key and strategic mines, and it has taken an ownership stake in some of those mines. It hasn't completely nationalized them, but there was a deal for two major mines where the government struck a concession with the mining companies and bought them for around $80 million, if I'm not mistaken. So it has been able to negotiate what that stake would look like and then actually gone forward and bought a stake in some of these mining companies. The other thing it's done is set up a state-owned mining company, which will take an ownership in all future projects, and it will have between 50% and 30% ownership. And back to the Russian question, a recent mining deal has just been struck where a Russian mining company has come in, but that Russian mining company has given up a 15% stake, which will be held by the Burkina Faso government. And so that's a key sign that there's a different kind of model that's being run now, where an African government has finally got serious and said, listen here, we're going to take a free carry investment. If you want to do business with us, that's fine. But then the government needs to be able to benefit, and presumably the people need to develop benefit from that. And a development fund has actually been set up to take some of these revenues that will come from mining and the state-owned mining company and go back to the people. Now, this is still very much in the early days, but it does show that with the right political will, African leaders can actually be quite bold about getting the mineral wealth of their countries into the coffers of the state and then redistributed to the people. And we've been told that this is impossible and it will implode the economy. Burkina Faso's economy hasn't imploded at all since this. Growth hasn't been spectacular, but in the first year of Traore's reign, it was around 1.8%. Then I think around 2.5% to 3%, and it's projected somewhere at 4% for the next year. So Traore has proven that you can get serious about mineral ownership and not tank an economy if you do it wisely. He's also focused a lot on beneficiation, and there has been talk of a first gold refinery where gold will be taken not just as a raw material, but it will be refined, maybe turned into gold bars. That was started in November of 2023. But as far as I'm able to...
Wonderful performances everywhere. Oh boy, you see how results they shock. Oh God. Truly, the result of a true leader, they shock every time. And so, go they deliver for the interest of the people. But when it comes to Nigeria, just see how they want to use corruption, take pieces all the states for the nation.
Creation of about 31 states across the country. We're now joined by Victor Okai. He is a public affairs analyst to share his perspective on the state creation proposal. Thank you very much for giving us your time. I'll just not beat around the bush and ask, is this dead on arrival, or is it a viable consideration at this time in the country's history?
Well, I find it a bit laughable that that seems to be the priority of the National Assembly at a time like this. It's not to say that it's not something that has been on the, that has been considered for a while. But when you hear the number, it just tells you that everyone wants his village to be a state. Otherwise, we currently have many states that are not viable. It's so obvious that many states are not sustainable. I mean, you saw what happened with the new tax reform bill being proposed, where many states are complaining and all that. And so it just tells that a lot of these states, as are currently, as they currently stand, are not viable. And what it does mean is that, I mean, as soon as you create new states, you're going to have new state assemblies, new state assembly complexes, new commissioners. You buy cars for all of these, and it's just going to be so loaded. And this is money that should rightfully go into development.
But what
so
about the argument?
I think that it's a priority right now. It's certainly not 31. 31 just simply means everyone wants to be a governor.
There is argument that
yes,
having more states will ensure that governance get a little closer to the people, and that the expected expenses is okay in light of the benefits that will bring governance closer to the people.
While I do not argue with those who say that, but I would also want to point out that if the local governments were properly strengthened, that very objective will be accomplished, because the local government is the closest to the people. If the state governments were not pilfering local government funds, and they allowed the local government chairman use the money for development as a third tier of government, then I think that that particular objective would have been met. Yeah, well, if you say, I mean, there are some states right now where the only developed parts of those states are the capital, the capital towns, or if you like, call them capital villages or cities, and there's not much, further down as you go into the state. So I think that what we need to do is that, unfortunately, there's no political will because every president that comes, they're afraid, is thinking about continuity of second term, and so they don't want to disrupt the status quo. They don't want the governors to go against them. Otherwise, I think what the current president was proposing about strengthening the local government areas and making sure that money goes directly to them would have taken care of that. I don't see why they even put it off and say it should come further. It's just a compromise that will not do anybody any good. If there must be development at the grassroots, let it be through the local government. That's why they were created.
On the off chance that there's a possibility that this idea for more states would even be considered, how feasible is the stringent legislative requirement, particularly is in the endorsement by 24 state houses of assembly? Is that even something that can be collated?
Well, it's the way, with the number I see there, it's not going to be too difficult because it's going to be scratch my back, I scratch your back. What it simply means, therefore, is that because they have spread it so wide, or so many people are applying, nearly every region is covered, most places are covered. What you just simply need, and once you have what you call it now, I think an overwhelming majority in your state House of Assembly, and if this state House of Assembly are favored in the sense that they also have new states, then it's going to fly. So it may not be impossible, but it's going to create a wieldy second tier of